Welcome to your daily dose of theological German, where a sentence a day keeps the dissertation detractors away, and where, unfortunately, a sentence a day has also become too much of a keeping the dissertation completion away for yours truly. This is just a quick little announcement, and I'll talk about it again tomorrow just to make sure my regular viewers are aware, but I'm going to be putting this channel on hiatus after the end of this week's episodes. But there's lots of stuff on the channel that you can go back and watch, and there's many playlists that have been created, so I encourage you to check those out. But yeah, I've got a dissertation to write, so I need to take a break from producing a video every stinking day. But let's look at this, installment number 9 of Karl Barth, the teaching of the Word of God. Okay, today's sentence is particularly frustrating, I think. I mean, just pause the video for a second and just try to translate that. It's it's classic Barth and his self-interrupting style and his, use of parallel phrases and things like this. So when you just go along here and you try to start translating, okay, a person, we've been tracking this, how we say instead of the here for these instances of the definite article in German. So if you're following these episodes in this series, you'll be familiar with why we've been doing that. But anyways, a person, then you have your verb here, wird, and so that could be to become, but more often than not, it's an auxiliary verb, and it's either going to indicate the future or passive. And so you're going to want to look for a verb at the end of the clause. But this is where it's kind of tricky, and I think even in English, you might hear people do this sometimes. This one is functioning as an auxiliary verb. It's a future, and so we're going to translate it that way. But you will hear this even in English, where people will try to do this. A person will, and then they interrupt themselves. Before they get to the rest of the kind of verbal construction, they throw some extra stuff in there, and that's what Barth is doing here. A person will, as a Christian, again and again, for it or about it, and in all things. The problem is, in English, I think you might throw in one phrase, right? A person will, as a Christian, be asked. In German, you can throw in, apparently, a lot more phrases. There's really kind of, well, I would say 4 different phrases there. Maybe, yeah, 4 different phrases, okay? In between. And then you actually end up with a relative clause right here after all that. And then some more phrases. Ay, ay, ay. And then finally down at the end, you get the verb that complements. So, okay, a couple of things quickly to note here before I try to help you make better sense of this. There are these pronouns here, ihr, they're feminine, singular, and you should not say her. That would be incorrect. These are referring, in fact, to Liebe, which has been in the discussion up until this point. And so you're just going to say it. So just so we're clear about that. But what are we going to do here? I want to try to give you some sort of a strategy for dealing with a sentence like this, because you can't really just read it unless you're really just like a almost native German user. You're going to need to have some strategy when you start to get confused as you look at it to really just pull it apart and put it back together in a way that's translatable and understandable. So when you're looking at a sentence like this, what I would do is try to just identify the basic clause structure. So that means you need at least a subject and a verb, okay, before you even worry about an object. Let's at least try to find the subject and the verb, okay? So here you have your subject, the person or a person. Here's your verb, wird, but this is an auxiliary verb, and you should just suspect that. I mean, it could be the main verb, but you should suspect it's auxiliary, and so you want to find the rest of the verbal construction before you can kind of say you've got your subject and your verb, because I guess technically, a person will is the verb, but you want to complete it with whatever else goes with it. So you're going to look for your end of your clause, right? And we kind of did this an episode or 2 ago. You're looking for either an infinitive or a participle at the end of a clause. You don't have the end of your clause here, and there's no further verbs here to pick this up, and you can just tell from the way it reads that this is not the end of your clause. And then this whole entire thing here is then offset. Okay, so that's a relative clause, and it's self-contained. It's actually got its verbs down here at the end. It's got everything it needs in there to stand alone in terms of construction of having a subject and a verb and so forth. Okay, so it's subordinate in the sense that it's can't stand alone that way, but it does have at least its components. So you can basically ignore it, is what I'm trying to say. So then you're going to breeze past everything else and just go right to the end of the sentence, because that's the end of the clause that kind of started up there with wird. And then you see that you have a sein verb here, which is infinitive, which means this is a future tense, and sein then also is actually functioning here like an auxiliary, and it's taking gefragt, this participle with the ge prefix. It's a past participle, and so you have a kind of quasi fake passive situation here, okay? So what you can do then is just kind of omit everything else and just take those bits of the structure. And so then you can translate this much more easily, right? A person will be asked. So that makes a lot more sense. That's your basic clause. And you can just kind of take that and now just add in the rest of those phrases in some kind of an appropriate way. And you can kind of isolate the phrases and deal with them one at a time, as you will see. Okay, so your phrases are not all going to be offset by commas. Some commas do a variety of things. We haven't really covered that in a lot of detail in this channel, but you have to find your phrases just by kind of the semantics of what's going on and the use of various kinds of particles and prepositions and things. So here you'll see as a Christian, here you'll see immer wieder, which kind of just means, well, I mean, literally it's like always again, but you could just say again and again or something like that, repeatedly. Then you have here about it. Then you have this conjunction, which just kind of joins the phrases, but you can just put it together, let's say, with this one in everything. Then you have a relative clause. So this is everything that, okay? So this whole clause we'll just deal with in a minute, okay? But that's everything, and that's just going to elaborate on what everything is. And then here you have participle functioning as an adjective, meaning something like crucially or critically. And then you just have kind of a bunch of adverbs here, always, only, and then another phrase about it, which actually repeats this one that we already saw up here. And then you have the rest of your verbal construction as we already were looking at before. So that's how you kind of, are going to pick out the phrases, and then you can translate them one at a time. If you need to look up words, etc., you just look them all up, translate them, and then you can start slotting them back in. Okay, so let's deal with this relative clause here, okay? So this is in everything that such and such. Okay, so here's this relative clause. Now, down at the end of the clause is where you'll find your verb because it's a subordinate clause, and you see here that you have this conjunction and you actually have two conjugated verbs side by side in parallel, and we've seen this before in Barth. It's perfectly allowed. You just have to deal with the verbs kind of together. They're both at the end of the clause, they're both conjugated, and so they're working together. However, they're also both here auxiliary verbs. Kann being a modal and wird being a future construction. And so they each are going to have complementary verbs, and so you see these other two verbs in the sentence, these infinitives, except the way this sentence is kind of structured and the semantics of it is that tun oder lassen is going to be complementing both kann und wird, you see? And so it's not that you can do and will leave or permit, it's that you can and will do or leave. And so that's the other thing I want to just mention here is that tun and lassen are functioning here kind of as a merism in some sense. They're sort of opposites. They're contrasting. And so you're going to say do or leave, maybe, but what you might want to just say is do or not do, because that's kind of the sense of lassen in this particular context. Often lassen means to permit, and it needs another kind of complementing infinitive of some kind, but not in this case. In this case, it just means kind of the opposite of doing or leaving, leaving alone, doing, etc. So you might just want to, for clarity, say do or not do, okay? And so the whole relative clause is going to say, let's see, I'll pick a different color, in everything that he ever can and will do or not do, okay? So that's your relative clause. So once you've got that, you can then put that into the rest of the sentence, translate all those phrases that we just highlighted, and you'll get kind of a full translation. So let's take a look. So I'm going to put the first adverbial phrase up front, actually, because I think it'll flow better in English. We'll just say, as a Christian, a person will be asked. again and again for it. And in everything that he ever can and will do or not do, crucially, always only for it. In that translation, you kind of lose the verb for a second there when you get down to that second part of the sentence, so you might want to just pick it up over here and say, crucially, and then just repeat the phrase, right? He will be asked always only for it, just so that your reader, if you were translating this, would not get lost in the train of thought. But anyway, I think that was a particularly difficult sentence. I don't know about you. Let me know in the comments. As always, thanks for watching, and please do like and subscribe and share with all your friends. And I'm sorry that we're going to be going on hiatus, but there's one more video tomorrow, so make sure you check back.